Russia, the absolute largest country on Earth, is a mixture of over 170 nationalities and cultures that live in a land that's larger than the surface of the moon. To manage such a large territory, the country is divided into dozens of federal subjects. We've already covered all of the republics. Check out this playlist to explore them all. But today, we're moving on to the next type of federal subject, federal cities. And we're starting off with Moscow. Hello, and welcome to 7 Facts. I don't think there's a person on Earth who hasn't heard of Moscow. It's the capital city of the entire Russian Federation, home of the president, the federal government, and the parliament. It's the center of Russian culture, science, and sport, and it's the city we think about when talking about Russia. Moscow is also an autonomous federal subject, a federal city that administers itself with its own government and parliament. Despite the fact that it's one of the most famous cities on Earth, it's surprising how little most people know about Moscow. In the next few minutes, we'll shed some light on just a few facts you probably didn't know about Moscow. What is the #1 landmark in Russia's capital city? Why, the Moscow Kremlin, of course. First of all, a Kremlin is a fortification, a citadel, and the Moscow Kremlin is just one of many. Its origins can be traced back to the 11th century, when the first fortifications appeared here. By the 14th century, the old wooden fortifications were replaced with white limestone walls, which still constitute the basic foundations of the current walls. It was only much later that the facade of the walls was covered with red bricks, and even those were painted in white to protect the bricks. In the late 19th century, it was finally decided not to paint it anymore, so the red color appeared. Thus, for much of its history, the iconic red walls of the Kremlin were actually white. Moscow is one of the largest urban economies in the world, where 1/5 of Russia's entire GDP is generated. It's also among the most expensive cities on the planet, so not anyone can move here and live comfortably. But billionaires can. Moscow is home to a record number of dollar billionaires. According to Forbes magazine, the world's richest are constantly drawn to Moscow. In 2008, there were 74 billionaires living in this city. Since then, the number dropped to 69, which still ranks Moscow at number 4 of the cities with the most billionaires. As for the rest of the regular people, Moscow is still a pretty sweet deal. It has the lowest unemployment rate in the country and the highest monthly wages. It's one of the largest financial and industrial centers in Europe, all of which sound pretty good. All that's left is to figure out how to bring the same stats to the rest of the country. Before we get to the next fact, I'd like to ask you one thing. This video isn't sponsored, none of them are so far, so perhaps you'd consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron. If you still enjoy my content, go visit my Patreon page and help this channel out. Okay, let's go to fact number 4. In any big city, the subway is an essential part of the infrastructure. Moscow is no different. Except that it is. First off, the Moscow Metro is the largest and busiest transit system in Europe and the 5th largest in the world. And it's still expanding. On average, there are nearly 7 million riders using the metro per day. That's an average of 2.4 billion people every year. Its 263 stations span across nearly 400 kilometers of tracks, and some of those stations are among the deepest in the world, going as low as 84 meters on the ground. And yes, some stations are indeed designed to be used as a fallout shelter. While these stats are already impressive enough, we can't overlook the fact that the Moscow Metro is a tourist attraction in itself. It is considered as the most beautiful underground transit system on Earth. Every station has a unique design indicative of the era and political leader of the time. Lined with marble and decorated with chandeliers, intricate mosaic artworks, heroic statues and gilded trimmings, the Moscow Metro stations are not merely decorated. They are works of art. Time for some more impressive facts. Moscow is the major political, economic, cultural and scientific center of Russia and Eastern Europe, as well as the largest city both by population and by area entirely on the European continent. 12.5 million people live here, which places Moscow among the largest cities on the planet. It's also a global city, meaning it's a primary node in the global economic network. The city's wonderful architecture also turns Moscow into one of the fastest growing tourist destinations on the planet. 40% of Moscow is covered by greenery, making it one of the greenest capitals in the world. The city is served by 5 airports, 9 railway stations, God knows how many trams, buses and monorails, plus the Moscow Metro. It even has 3 freight ports and 2 passenger ports for water transportation and a cable car system. No matter where you stand politically in relation to Russia, there is no denying Moscow is an impressive city. Moscow was the capital of various precursors of modern Russia. Since the Middle Ages, it was an important urban center, but it was only in the 15th century that Moscow took the leading role in liberating Russians from Mongol domination and become the capital of a soon-to-be colossal empire. But Moscow ceased to be the capital of the Russians in 1712, when Tsar Peter the Great moved his government to the newly built Saint Petersburg in an effort to westernize his empire. Nevertheless, it didn't lose its prominent status and continued to grow and develop. In the following 200 years, the city grew from 200,000 people to over 1.8 million. Moscow once again became the capital of Russia thanks to the Bolsheviks. Following the success of the Russian Revolution of 1917, Vladimir Lenin, fearing possible foreign invasion, moved the capital back to Moscow in 1918. The Kremlin once again became the seat of power and the political center of the new communist state. Before we end the video, it's time to bring in a creepy fact about one of Moscow's most infamous buildings, the house on the embankment. Here's the story. The relocation of the capital from St. Petersburg to Moscow caused an increasing need to house civil servants in Moscow. So it was decided that, opposite the Kremlin, a residential building was to be built for the Soviet political elite. The new apartment block was completed in 1931 and was luxurious for their time. The building also featured a sports hall, tennis court, kindergarten, library, laundrette and a kitchen from which meals could be ordered. A pretty sweet deal. But the Soviet Union was led by Stalin, who wasn't exactly the most trusting person. During the Great Purge of the 1930s, Stalin ordered a large-scale purge of the Communist Party and government officials. No one was safe. During this time, the house on the embankment had the highest per capita arrests, executions and disappearances in Moscow. At least 1/3 of its residents vanished. In numbers, that's around 800 people. The purge reached such ridiculous levels that some apartments held up to 6 sets of occupants in just 3 years. By law, if the wife of the unfortunate quote-unquote traitor refused to recognize her husband as an enemy of the people, she was next in line. By 1941, the house was empty. The residents that escaped the purge were moved or sent to the front lines to fight the Germans. It was only after the war that life in the house on the embankment resumed. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Leave your comments downstairs and don't forget there's a Patreon page where you can support this channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye.